Mutiny at sea was the ultimate betrayal, an act so rare and dangerous it could shatter empires and seal a sailor's fate in blood. In the age of sail, discipline held ships together through storms, starvation, and isolation, enforced by captains who wielded absolute power. Yet beneath the surface of every voyage simmered tension, hunger, punishment, homesickness, and pride. The 1789 mutiny aboard the HMS Bounty wasn't just a revolt against a commander. It was a rebellion against the brutal machinery of empire itself. But was Captain William Bligh truly the tyrant history remembers, or has his legacy been twisted by myth, mutineers, and the men left behind? The 1935 film Mutiny on the Bounty, starring Clark Gable as the rebellious junior officer Fletcher Christian and Charles Lawton as the ship's captain, Lieutenant William Bligh, presented the story of the crew aboard a Royal Navy ship, the HMS Bounty, that mutinied against their cruel and abusive captain. There were remakes in 1962 starring Marlon Brando as Christian and Trevor Howard as Bligh, and then again in 1984 with Mel Gibson as Fletcher Christian and Anthony Hopkins as William Bligh. Each provided their own slant on the story. But this is where fact and fiction become blurred. History can be distorted and even misinterpreted. The history lesson people receive through film and literature is not always accurate regarding historical events. Regarding the Bounty, here are the facts. Were the various film depictions accurate? Was Captain Bligh really a cruel and sadistic man? Were Fletcher Christian and the crew justified in their revolt? What happened to all parties afterward? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. Few people in naval history have a name as infamous as William Bligh, who had a long, interesting, and well-documented career. Life in any navy in the 18th century was hard, but in the Royal Navy, it was often brutal. Ship captains were judge, jury, and executioner if required. Punishments were draconian, often crippling if not lethal. Executions were not that uncommon, and the degree and severity of punishment, even for minor offenses, was at the sole discretion of the captain. Bligh, in comparison to his contemporaries, was not considered a harsh disciplinarian, as he was not a flogger, and the punishment books of his various commands show fewer and less severe punishments than most meted out in his time. Bligh served under the legendary Captain James Cook prior to assuming command of the Bounty, and Cook was well known to be a consistently harsh disciplinarian who once had a man flogged for failing to salute. But Bligh and even Cook were considered rather lenient commanders in the fleet. In fact, despite popular myth, Bligh could not have flogged any man, as he did not have the rank and he was not commissioned as a ship's master despite being in command. This was manifested when the crew of the HMS Hermione, under the command of one Captain Hugh Piggott, revolted as a result of harsh punishment. Many of the men were pressed seamen, kidnapped from towns and other ships to serve against their will. They were still subject to the laws of the sea and the whims of even sometimes brutal captains like Piggott, some who enjoyed inflicting pain and terror. Flogging with the infamous cat-o'-nine-tails was the usual punishment. On one occasion, a man was keel-hauled for theft and died as a result. As for Piggott, he was described as one of the most cruel and oppressive captains belonging to the Royal Navy. Even those in the Admiralty in London, themselves former ship captains, often took a dim view of Piggott's methods. Bligh was not that type of officer, but he did have a problem within various ships. He was not always consistent with punishment, and the infractions often ranging from minor to serious, although he never flogged, never keel-hauled, and he did place men on bread and water for extended periods of time or added watch duties. Bligh, who would eventually fall prey to a total of 3 mutinies in his career, was still an oppressive commander who insulted subordinates. Despite not being ruthless like some other captains, his lack of consistency in administering punishment often led to his crew losing faith in his command ability, and, as a result, he became widely disliked in the service. HMS Bounty left Portsmouth, England, on December 23, 1787, on an expedition to Tahiti to gather breadfruit plants for transportation to plantations in the Caribbean islands, primarily Jamaica and the Bahamas. The discovery of breadfruit in 1769 on the island of Tahiti by the aforementioned world-famous Captain James Cook on board the HMS Endeavour opened up a new agricultural product in the British West Indies and Southern American colonies. This became very critical after Britain lost the colonies in the American Revolution. Botanist Sir Joseph Banks, who had sailed with Cook and knew Bligh, was named president of the Royal Society in 1778. Banks concluded that breadfruit might fill the sudden gap in the diet of English slaves working the sugar plantations of Jamaica and the Lesser Antilles. Support for an expedition to Tahiti to retrieve and transplant breadfruit to the Caribbean was successful due to the efforts of Banks, who constantly pushed the idea, and in 1787 he successfully petitioned King George III to sponsor the effort. William Bligh was recommended by Banks, and he was chosen to command Bounty, as he had served as executive officer under Cook with Banks on the previous voyage. William Bligh's career at sea had been remarkable. By age 22, he was appointed sailing master of the HMS Resolution, captained by James Cook. After rounding the Cape of Good Hope, the Resolution spent a year exploring the Pacific from the southern islands to the Arctic North. In the Sandwich Islands, which we today call Hawaii, Bligh witnessed Cook being beaten to death on the beach by natives, a shocking event which might have powerfully shaped his own ideas about discipline. By 1786, Bligh commanded his first ship, the HMS Britannia, and this was where he met 23-year-old Fletcher Christian. On August 20, 1787, Lieutenant Bligh took command of the Bounty. When he began to outfit and man the ship, one of the first persons he recruited was Fletcher Christian. Bligh planned to sail the Bounty west around Cape Horn, also called the Straits of Magellan, at the tip of South America, to fulfill his personal ambition to circumnavigate the globe. After 31 days, the attempt to round the Cape failed due to harsh weather, and he risked losing his ship. Bligh then decided to take the longer eastern route around the Cape of Good Hope at South Africa into the Indian Ocean across to the Pacific. The Bounty reached Cape Town on May 24th, where it remained for 38 days as it was completely overhauled and resupplied. Bligh wrote in his ship's diary, "Perhaps a voyage of 5 months, which I have now performed without touching at any one place but Tenerife, in the Canary Islands, has never been accomplished with so few accidents and such health among seamen in a like continuance of bad weather." During the difficult months at sea and the layover on the Cape, Bligh and Christian remained on good terms. The Bounty was ready and left to continue the mission. 7 weeks later, the Bounty anchored at Adventure Bay off the southern coast of Tasmania. When the shore party landed was when the trouble started. Bligh criticized ship's carpenter William Purcell for cutting poor quality billets of wood. Purcell responded that Bligh just came on shore to find fault and became so insolent that Bligh ordered him back to the ship. Bligh knew that he was very short-handed and he could not afford to confine or put Purcell on trial for refusing orders. Purcell knew the limitations of Bligh's legal authority regarding punishment given his rank and commission, and he did not stop his insubordination towards Bligh. James Morrison, boatswain's mate, wrote that at Adventure Bay were sown seeds of eternal discord between Lieutenant Bligh and the carpenter, and it would be no more than true to say with all the officers in general. During the stay at Adventure Bay, tensions rose, especially after the first death occurred. Able seaman James Valentine contracted a mysterious sickness and was bled by the ship's surgeon, Dr. Thomas Huggin. This was a usual medical practice. This resulted in an infection, which led to Valentine's high fever, delirium, and death. Bligh blamed Valentine's death on the incompetence of Huggin and the indifference of officers whom he believed should have spotted Valentine's symptoms earlier. After a full 10-month journey, the Bounty arrived in Tahiti in October 1788 and remained there for more than 5 months due to the typhoon season, where the crew enjoyed a more relaxed and far less chaotic life, enjoying the comfortable climate and warm hospitality of the Tahitians. This was when Fletcher Christian fell in love with a Tahitian woman named Muatawa. In January 1789, 3 crew members, Charles Churchill, John Millward, and William Musprat, deserted and stole gunpowder, muskets, and ammunition. Bligh ordered the tribal chiefs to return the men and supplies or suffer the consequences. The men were recaptured and subjected to repeated lashings, but not with the cat-o'-nine-tails, which was beyond Bligh's legal authority and placed in irons. But they were grateful that Bligh said he would not recommend them for a court-martial, which could have resulted in their hanging. On April 4, 1789, the Bounty departed Tahiti with its store of 1,015 breadfruit saplings. Many of the men did not want to leave paradise, and that was the source of resentment. On April 11th, Master John Fryer recorded and testified later at trial that Bligh and Christian argued bitterly. According to Fryer, around midnight on April 21st, Christian complained to Bligh, "Sir, your house is so bad that I cannot do my duty with any pleasure. I have been in hell for weeks with you." After the theft of an anchor grappling by natives and some missing coconuts, Bligh accused Christian. Bligh then cut the sweet potato rations in half for the crew. On April 28, near the island of Tonga, Christian and 25 petty officers and seamen seized the ship in the infamous mutiny. Bligh described what happened in the pre-dawn hours of April 28th. Just before sunrising, Mr. Christian, with the master-at-arms, gunner's mate, and Thomas Burkett, seaman, came into my cabin while I was asleep, and seizing me, tied my hands with a cord behind my back and threatened me with instant death if I spoke or made the least noise. Christian and his conspirators believed that Bligh and his 18 loyal crewmen would die after they were placed in a 23-foot open, overcrowded, and overloaded lifeboat during the voyage from the vicinity of Tafoa to Timor with very limited provisions, which included twine, canvas, lines, sails, a 20-gallon cask of water, 150 pounds of bread, a tool chest, a compass, 4 cutlasses, and a small quantity of rum. Bligh's navigational and mathematical skills were later demonstrated after the mutiny. By his remarkable seamanship, Bligh and his men reached Timor in the East Indies on June 14, 1789, after a voyage of about 3,600 miles. Bligh returned to England, and the subsequent court-martial, routine in cases where captains lose ships, found him innocent of any wrongdoing. The nation hailed Bligh as a hero, and within a year he was appointed captain of a new breadfruit expedition, this one with a full complement of lieutenants and marines for better security. This remarkable story of survival became legendary in the Navy. Fletcher Christian was certainly no honorable hero, because if he were, then he would have joined Bligh and the others in the lifeboat. The fact that he didn't supports the allegation of him leading the mutiny. But what happened to the mutineers? Christian and his men arrived on the island of Tubuai, and they attempted to establish a small colony for themselves. When that failed, the Bounty sailed north to Tahiti, and 16 crewmen decided to stay there, despite the risk of capture by British authorities. They faced hanging when caught. Christian and 8 others, together with 6 Tahitian men, a dozen Tahitian women, and a child, decided to continue searching the South Pacific for a safe haven. In January 1790, the Bounty settled on Pitcairn Island, an isolated and uninhabited volcanic island more than 1,000 miles east of Tahiti. In the summer of 1790, Captain Edward Edwards assumed command of the 24-gun frigate HMS Pandora, with orders to sail to the Pacific and recapture the mutineers. He did capture several, but on Australia's Great Barrier Reef, the Pandora ran aground and broke up. 31 crew members and 4 of the 14 prisoners went down with the ship. The other 10 prisoners, scattered among 4 lifeboats, eventually reached Kupang and finally England in March 1792, where 3 were later hanged on October 29, 1794. Bligh's reputation further suffered at the hands of Fletcher Christian's family after some of the Bounty's crew were returned to England for court-martial. Bligh swore that all those returned were equally guilty, but the court acquitted a couple of them on the basis of testimony of others that they had not participated in the actual mutiny and had in fact asked to be allowed to leave with Bligh in the already overloaded boat. Fletcher Christian had not been captured and returned to England, but the fact that some had been acquitted opened to his family the possibility that he, too, might be acquitted if he were to ever be returned to England, and this was when they began destroying Bligh's reputation as best they could. This became a much easier task due to another mutiny. The information that the Christian family provided to anyone who would listen regarding Bligh, despite their having no first-hand knowledge, became the accepted story. Bligh himself was at sea and unable to personally challenge the smear campaign. That image of Bligh, his character and demeanor, which was exaggerated, still exists today in popular literature and film. But if it were all true, the HMS Bounty would probably never have reached Tahiti in the first place. Regarding Fletcher Christian, he remains an enigma to many. Bligh was certainly no Hugh Pigot, and according to testimony, there was no actual justification for the mutiny. The most intriguing part of the story was that Bligh had actually handpicked Christian to be his executive officer due to his stellar record and capabilities. So what made Christian and the others mutiny? One may only speculate, but the fact that they probably sought a more relaxed and peaceful life outside the Navy with the women in Tahiti may have been a catalyst, and an officer like Bligh would not have abandoned his duty and mission. In 1808, an American whaling vessel was drawn to Pitcairn by smoke from a cooking fire. The Americans discovered a community of children and women led by John Adams, the sole survivor of the original 9 mutineers. According to Adams, after settling on Pitcairn, the colonists had stripped and burned the Bounty, and internal strife and sickness had led to the death of Fletcher Christian and all the others. In 1825, a British ship arrived and formally granted Adams amnesty, and he served as patriarch of the Pitcairn community until his death in 1829. In 1831, the Pitcairn Islanders were resettled on Tahiti but became rather unsatisfied with life there, so they returned to their native island. In 1838, the Pitcairn Islands, which includes 3 nearby uninhabited islands, was incorporated into the British Empire. By 1855, Pitcairn's island's population had grown to nearly 200 people, and the 2-square-mile island could not sustain its residents, and they began to starve. In 1856, the islanders were removed to Norfolk Island, a formal penal colony nearly 4,000 miles to the west. However, less than 2 years later, 17 of the islanders returned to Pitcairn, followed by more families in 1864. Today, just a few dozen people live on Pitcairn Island, and just a few are descendants of the mutineers. Today, about 1,000 residents of Norfolk Island, which is about half the population, are descendants of Fletcher Christian and 8 other British sailors, the final legacy of the mutiny that made history, for better or worse. Thank you for watching this episode of Forgotten History. If you liked what you saw, please click like, share, and subscribe. And if you would like to assist with the ever-increasing cost of production, please consider becoming a channel member and joining our Patreon page. Please check out our merchandise store. And thanks for watching.